Welcome to TGCon Live and our session on transparency and NPD. Give me a moment to share the slides here, folks. Great. First, before we jump into our topic, I have just a few housekeeping announcements that I'd like to mention. First, as we've been mentioning, your best viewing experience is going to be in theater mode. So go ahead and click that button. It gives you the opportunity to see the slides, your speaker, and still stay engaged in the chat and the poll tab. That's the next thing. We would love for you to join the conversation in the chat box. Enter in your questions as the presentation goes on, and then we'll get to just as many audience questions as we can. There are going to be a couple of poll questions that we're going to ask you to take. So that tab is right next to chat. So click on over there and please answer those poll questions. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Kim Essex, and let Kim from Ketchum take the floor. Kim, go ahead.
Great. Hey, Dana, I am viewing your screen, but I don't have controls. So can you give me control?
Certainly.
Thank you. So the topic of transparency and new product development and the combination of those things, I know haunts many developers. So we're going to cover trends, consumer research, best practices in our short time together. But first, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Kim Essex. I am a partner at Ketchum, Inc. We are a global communications consultancy where I lead a team called Food, Agriculture, and Ingredient, and I do work for those clients. So my work is entirely focused on food companies and farmers and ranchers and growers who supply ingredients and fresh food to CPG, retail, food service operations. While it is primarily B2B work, food production, as you know, no longer lives behind that curtain. So I spent a lot of my time working with clients, helping them explain new practices, new technologies, new products that are coming to market to both customers and consumers. And I'd love to know a little bit about you. So as Dana mentioned, this is our first poll question, if you can take it. And again, that tab next to chat is a poll. And it's just asked you, what is your primary role in your organization? I can't see the results, but I'll get them afterwards. So I'd love that feedback. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. And Megan Krenz is raising her hand. I'm not quite sure.
Megan, if you can please just type your question into the chat box. We can either address it during the Q&A session, or if you're having a support issue, just click on the support tab, which is if you exit out of theater mode, you can find the support tab up above in the upper right-hand corner.
All right, Dana, I am having trouble advancing slides. That's the nature of this, isn't it?
There's just a little bit of a lag.
Well, I'm not even seeing the arrow.
Can you try to use your arrow keys, Kim?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I got it now. I see that. I see it. Okay, so we're gonna get through. Watch this. Ta-da! So a little bit about the firm. We're known for our food work. In addition to the work we do in the supply chain, the value chain, we support major food brands like General Mills and Nestle and Wendy's and PepsiCo and Kraft Heinz and many others. And on this slide here, you see a few facts about us. Many of our 2,400, 2,500 employees around the globe are certified in nutrition. Many of them are registered dietitian nutritionists. We have food communicators, people who've worked in food for a better part of their career, who are specialists also in issues and crisis, sustainability, because of course that is a topic of increased interest when it comes to food, media relations, digital, social, and many of the marketing tools and tactics. And because the firm has spent and has dedicated more than 65 years of its existence, we're almost 100 years old here, to the food industry, we invest in research as well to help us understand the marketing environment for our clients. And that's some of the research I want to share with you now. This is a quick overview of the studies I'm going to lean on in this presentation. We've studied consumer expectations of food companies in what can now be considered a longitudinal study of primary shoppers, starting in 2008 with the recent data collected just last year. We've also studied how best to communicate with consumers about food technology, which I think will be really relevant to our conversation today, both qualitatively, quantitatively, and we've done some biometrics work with consumers around that communications, which measures consumers' visceral response to communication stimulus. And then most recently, like many in the food industry and marketing fields, we have studied consumer behavior and attitudes toward food during COVID. So I'm going to kind of reference all of these things as we go along. So here's the obvious statement of the day. Technology is feeding the future of food. You know, driving innovations never before seen, creating solutions that really extend beyond imagination, reinventing processed foods and that business, both on the organic side and the conventional side, and building new opportunities, new ways to get food to more people in more places. Here's another statement of the obvious. Many consumers fear science in their food, except that one's not really true. Our 2018 research revealed there's growing comfort and interest in food technologies, which I think is really surprising. And that's one of the things that I always check myself on, is how not to buy into the assumptions that we all have around food, because we've been working in food a long time, we all eat, we're familiar with, and we talk about food, we celebrate around food, that there's so many assumptions around food that we often have to challenge ourselves to really get to the bottom of. And this is one of them. I think because technologies are increasingly solving consumers' challenges and creating exciting new products, the interest level in food technology and comfort level in food technology is increasing. Beyond Meat and Impossible are really the poster children for this movement. And that's good news. That means basically technology, food, and consumers are not operating in these diametrically opposed planes. But the fact is, as this slide says, you can't unlock the promise of the comfort and interest without putting yourself and your technology out there for discussion. You can't unlock that comfort and interest without gaining permission from consumers so that they believe that what you're doing is good for them, is in their best interest, and in the interest of society at large. And by consumers here, who I really mean is a group of consumers that we identified in that longitudinal research that I talked about on the primary shopper, that is more influential, this consumer is more influential than any other consumer in the marketplace. We call these folks food evangelists. And they surfaced in our third wave of research in 2013 when we were looking at primary shoppers and their expectations of what they wanted from food companies. We saw a subsegment of that primary shopper materialize, frankly, that was behaving differently when we were cutting all the data, behaving differently than the masses. In that, so primary shoppers, do many things very similarly. They're reading labels, they're shopping and looking at price and convenience and a variety of things, and they're looking to make smart decisions for themselves and their family. These food evangelists doing all the same things. They're kind of hidden in plain sight. They're trying to make smart decisions, healthy decisions for themselves and their family, but they also want to make you or help you make smart decisions for yourself and your family. Their excitement around food extends beyond their immediate needs to helping others and helping themselves kind of be experts in food, helping others make smart choices. And this behavior looks something like this. What you see here is they wind up advocating for food 4 or more times a week, advocating for food practices or critiquing food practices, sharing their opinions about brands or specific fresh foods, actively doing all of these things 4 or more times a week. So when the primary shopper is just making decisions, these guys are sharing their information. You likely know food evangelists in your midst. I have several of them, as now we've kind of identified these groups in research. I always identify them and think, oh, you're a food evangelist. They're the people who literally, a mom of a friend of my son's, they play baseball together. If I'm sitting on the bleachers, she'll hunker up to me and want to talk about food and what she's reading and what she's seeing and what she made and what she thinks about this brand of strawberries versus that brand of fresh strawberries. It's somebody who's just so compelled to share that information. That's the food evangelist. And they're super important. Ooh, I moved fast. Okay, the dial works, great. When we saw this behavior emerge in our 2013 data, which was a sample of consumers around the globe, representative of consumers in particular markets, including the United States, about 11% of the population was demonstrating these behaviors in the US. So for a company, say like PepsiCo, that hardly seemed like something to get excited about. You know, influential, yeah, but material, probably not. But year over year, as we've followed this behavior, the incidence of food evangelism has been increasing, and we've certainly felt their roar, you know, on the topics of high fructose corn syrup, red dye 40, partially hydrogenated oils, as well as fresh foods, like how much, you know, fruit juice should you drink, or, you know, the of course, lean, finely textured beef, or, you know, known by that horrible name, pink slime. Last year, 1 in 5 consumers in the U.S. Nearly 1 in 5 consumers in the U.S. Demonstrated this type of behavior. Remember, that's that advocacy behavior, recommending or critiquing a brand or a production practice. That classifies them as a food evangelist. And when I look at the growth in this curve, I believe food evangelism and food evangelists have gone from sort of that maverick consumer to mainstream. So let's look at these people who are influencing our opinions about food and food ingredients and practices, and kind of talk about who they are, what they think, what they believe. Many people assume that they're activists. They're aligned with some agenda, a non-government organization, but they're not. When we ask them, what groups do you belong to, what newsletters do you get, what petitions do you sign, they don't collectively move in any big swarm. They just care about food. They are researchers of food. They are constantly Googling, constantly reading, constantly absorbing information, scanning their phone and tablets, and they're actively sharing that news with others, offline and online, via their social platforms. One of the things that does distinguish them beyond that behavior with food is that they're actively involved in the community and report giving back more than the general population, which I think is, again, that inclination to want to help others is sort of the behavior we're seeing in these people. What drives them? Like primary shoppers, their health and the health of their family, certainly important when it comes to food, and we suspect other topics in their lives. They feel kind of an ethical obligation, moral obligation to share what they know with somebody else. It's sort of like an obligation that I share this interesting thing that I learned because it might help somebody make better decisions about the food they choose. They value information and experience that allows them to discover for themselves what's going on. They like the inside track because it gives them a little bit of currency with their friends and family and their social circles, that they know something that would be valuable to other people that other people don't know. And they despise marketing hyperbole. Things like 4 and 5 dentists or cheesy moms choose Jif. They're just really skeptical of marketing tactics and and slogans and the like. They want to see proof. They want to be the judge for themselves. They want to see a lot of information and then articulate it for others. That's why they really trust other food evangelists like themselves, experts, companies. They absolutely want to hear from people inside companies, journalists who've studied the topic, retailers who they believe are sort of third-party managers of the food supply chain, and an objective third party, though we know that there's certainly a vested interest in retailers in certain foods over others, but that's who they listen to. And I think what that says is that they're looking at a variety of different sources, and they like to know people who have a bit of the inside track, which I think is good news for companies who have a lot of experts like product developers who can have a voice in this discussion. And then finally, what do they expect? They expect to be engaged, not sold. They want access to executives and product developers. When sharing information with them, they appreciate the opportunity to go deeper, to learn more, even if they don't do it. So the idea of access to information is super important to these people because it suggests that you're being transparent, you're willing to share. And what they'd love to see from you is this idea of humility and fallibility. They want to hear the good, bad, and the ugly, frankly. That builds trust. For you to be able to say, this is what we've done, this is what didn't work, we're still learning and improving, and here's how we've improved, shows the journey, gives them the backstory and the confidence to believe in the information that they're receiving. Now, these people in the beginning really leaned into some certain demographics. There were more women than men, more parents, more educated, slightly higher income. But that's not the case anymore. As this population has grown, average income, equal number of parents, and interestingly, last year, more men than women were food evangelists. I'm particularly excited about that news as a marketer, that there's an opportunity to engage men in the conversation about food. Likewise, the younger generation opts into these behaviors, does these behaviors more than older generations, particularly younger millennials, older Gen Z, who we call Gen Zennials. They're essentially consumers in their 20s, are 28% of them are demonstrating these behaviors, so 1 in 4 versus the general population of 1 in 5. And I think what's most interesting about these two cohorts, younger Gen Zennials and men, is that both of those audiences are more comfortable and more interested in food technologies than the other gender, women, and older generations. So they are both willing to speak up and more willing to learn about new technologies in food, which I think is a real opportunity for the product development field. And then COVID happened. So that was the ultimate speed bump as I think about it. And the crystal ball question for all of us watching this is all this home cooking and baking and Amazon ordering going to continue after we find a new normal? In other words, after we have a vaccine and feel sufficiently safe? I think this data from our survey just last month in July with consumers, a census representative sample, for those of you who geek out on data, 18 and older, about 3,900 Americans, and all, this is what we're hearing, that cooking at home and baking at home, I'm doing it now and it's super fun. But really what's gonna stick are these things like using meal kits, taking out and delivery, things that reinforce an attribute in our life that we valued before COVID and that we will value after, which is convenience. We still need convenient options in our lives, and you're seeing that reflected here in the data, that consumers are expecting to continue that sort of work. I'm adding this data to this little chart here to add some before dynamics here. because I asked myself, when you look at this data, what does that mean for attitudes about food technology? Because before COVID, as I was telling you, lots of comfort, lots of interest, but significantly more than I expected, having worked in the industry for a long time in food technology. Boy, COVID-19 and this upheaval has really put a dampening effect on that. Consumers are retrenching in their opinions about food technology, at least in the short term, as you see here, going from 62%, willing to try or likely to try to 35%, 56% comfortable to 37% comfortable. And I'm really curious, I want to take the next poll question, which asks you the question, what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to return to our comfort levels, or is this going to be a behavior that continues with us post-COVID into a new normal? So let's take a minute and do that poll question again right next to the chat box, if you can. This is one of those things that's so weird. It's like you can't see people taking in the poll, so you think, well, how much time?
Interestingly enough, 86% of the attendees say that they support product development in their companies.
Great, that's interesting. That is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, so I can see some of the data. As you guys are answering this question, and I'm sure you've answered it by now. I believe if we're looking at the now and later on some of these key food behaviors like baking and cooking and using meal kits and taking out and delivery of food, and kind of the stark differerences here of what's going to stick with us and what will fade. I'm anticipating, and maybe this is optimism on my part, a return to confidence, comfort, and trial of food technology. One, because I think the technologies are getting they're just mind-blowingly awesome. What we are able to do with food is so exciting, and I think consumers will be eager to try. It's fun, it's interesting. But also I think these technologies are now getting closer to solving some challenges and things that consumers want to see fixed, whether that's better tasting food or food that is produced in a way that solves an ethical problem that they struggle with, or a sustainability problem that they believe we have. So I'm optimistic that this will rebound, but we'll track it and see, and I'm curious to see what you all have to say. One of the other reasons that I think it's going to rebound is because the top 3 benefits Americans look for in validating food technology remain largely consistent from the data we collected in 2018 to the data we just collected last month. Foods with higher nutritional value, 2018, that was number 2. Number 1 today, foods that create less waste, number 3 in 2018, number 2 today, foods that are less likely to cause foodborne illness, number 1 in 2018, number 3 today. All of these things sort of alternate, but stay pretty steady and are able to be enhanced or solved through food technology. I had to laugh when I went into this data last night to prep for this presentation. I said, we must have asked about taste. Why isn't taste on this list? And here's me admitting fallibility here. We did not ask about taste. I am like, are we crazy? So I would guarantee you, if we asked taste, that would be on the top of this list too. Foods that taste better through technology would be a true benefit consumers would identify. I wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability, because I do think sustainability and technology have an intersection on how food technology and packaging technology can help support sustainability goals of customers and governments and NGOs and your own company. And consumers' thoughts around sustainability have changed a tad too. And I think that's worth flagging since COVID. This is probably not surprising. 82% of Americans perceive a brand more positively if the word sustainability or sustainable is associated with it. Often when we talk about sustainability, we think about it, and we believe consumers think about it and hitch it to environment, even though we're more inclined to think about it holistically as the three-legged stool, with the ability to support society and support sustainable business operations. So we asked consumers, we gave consumers a variety of options in answering or choosing definition that fit the mold for what they most believed. 26% of them said this definition fits my definition for sustainability, which is the ability to produce and provide food to people responsibly in ways that protect people and the planet. Nice, simple definition. 23% said something very similar, the ability to produce and provide food to people in the most environmentally friendly way possible. But the majority of people, by a slight margin, but significantly different than the other two definitions, chose this one, which suggests an expansion, I believe, of how consumers are thinking about sustainability today because of COVID. And that is the ability to produce and provide food to people responsibly in ways that protect people and the planet and ensure food is available when people want and need it. That idea of food accessibility and the supply chain enabling food accessibility for all people in a time of need has become paramount due to COVID. We never really imagined going without until we saw grocery store shelves being empty. So sustainability includes a lot of these things. It includes food safety. 77% say, yep, it's that. It's recyclability and reusable packaging. Yep, it's that. It's the economic viability of food production, of food producers, farmers and ranchers, and food businesses. Yep, it means that. It means less waste. It means environmental protection, the obvious, and food accessibility. So as we talk about sustainability in our mission as a company, to expand to this broader definition is advantageous because, again, consumers have affinity for companies that demonstrate that they're committed to these objectives. Okay, home stretch here. Let's talk a little bit about, as product developers or being part of the product development process, how we help facilitate consumer acceptance of new and necessary food technologies and novel ingredients. I have found that there's a lot of hand-wringing on the topic of food technology, just a lot of nervousness, and I totally get it. We're scared to talk about things that sound scary, that are hard to communicate. You're doing what to what? Is often kind of the eyebrow raising moment, and we're worried it could be words could be twisted because the road to technology, great food technologies, has been met with resistance, and so like RBST, GMOs, irradiation, we've seen resistance in this category, but the way through it is this. First, I'll tell you, resist the urge to leave your invention or your reinvention behind that curtain. Holding your breath, hoping nobody will ask you the question that you most don't want to get asked. Because in the era of food evangelism, you can't leave a blind spot. When you leave a blind spot and consumers can't see behind that curtain, they assume the worst. They assume something bad is going on back there, something unsavory. Always leave a breadcrumb trail to allow people who are exploring food evangelists and others the information you want them to have about how your product is made. Because the fact is, as the saying goes, the cover-up is worse than the crime. And sadly, you will be defending a technology that is not criminal, that is really making a difference in the world, but it will feel like a crime because you've covered it up. And you've treated it as something that needs to be hidden versus shared. See the world through the consumer lens, through the consumer's perspective. They're skeptical. They're distrustful. They're worried that companies put their profitable gains above their best interests, above their health. and their family's safety, and humanize your story with that lens of concern. I will tell you, I was sitting on an airplane when we used to fly, and working on a presentation, and I have no idea why I didn't have my screen shaded, but I didn't. And the woman across the aisle from me, as we landed and I folded up my laptop, said, "I see you work in GMOs." I'm like, great, she's been reading on my shoulder. And she said, "I have to tell you, my sister almost died from GMOs." And instead of me throwing a bunch of facts, I thought, oh gosh, I really don't know how to have this conversation while we're landing. I said to her, first, that is really scary, and I am really sorry to hear that. And how is she? Well, she survived. That was good to hear. Of course she survived. You know, this technology is vitally important to food production. And we talked a little bit, and I told her how I feel about it and my experience of being on farms and the advantages of crops that come from GMOs. And it was just a short, brief conversation, but my ability, you know, there wasn't any special words I said, but my ability to acknowledge her concern, but share my experience, I believe helped sort of diffuse her center of gravity just a tad. You know, it takes everybody moving the ball forward. I think the key here to the presentation of new product development and new technology is this. And this may look obvious, but it's not, and you'll find it so when you're communicating. We often jump later downstream in communicating what we do for a living than starting with the problem. And we have to state the problem first. We have to state, what are we trying to solve, and get people nodding that indeed that is a problem. You're right. Not many plant-based foods taste good. You know, cheese doesn't melt right. Or you're right, there is an issue with sustainability that we could solve. Or you're right, there's a lot of arid land out there that's not getting enough water. We can't grow crops. We have to solve for that problem. Get people nodding about the problem before you introduce your development, whatever that happens to be, the thing you're solving for, and talk about what you've created and how it solves for that problem in a very simple and easy way. And then bring in benefits. The problem with benefits, and when we lead with benefits, is it sounds like a sales pitch. It sounds like a marketing ploy. Let me tell you about this great thing and all the things it does. It sounds like a sales pitch, and people back off. They're skeptical. They're suspicious. They're like, yeah, this guy or gal is just, you know, over the top, crazy about their thing, but I'm not so sure it's right for me. So the benefits are really supporting points. When you share benefits, start with the ones that are closer into the consumer, personal, safety, health, and then add other benefits. And they do want to hear about the benefits of how it saves the company money or allows for, you know, use of less resources, things like that make a difference to other non-personal benefits. And then illustrate why you're really confident that those benefits are doable, that you can achieve this goal because you've studied it. You're an expert in and of yourself and what you've done in the field. And then provide the proof, you know, share an example of somebody who's experienced the product. Use, you know, a real just approachable educational tone, not preachy, not selling, not elitist, just make it approachable and just factual, and provide other ways for people to learn. I think some of the best communicators in food today will always do this. They always stop short of the full story, because you can saturate people and they'll say, if you want to learn more, go to this website, or, you know, I wrote a blog on it, or whatever it happened to be. Invite people to learn more. Again, that idea allows them to believe, whether you're being so or not, that you're being transparent. From a process perspective, what I'd say is I think about product development as a building, and in it is brilliant people doing brilliant work to make a difference. And think about the role of a multidisciplinary team as a scaffolding around your building. They're not in your building. They're not in your business every day. They're supporting the building. They're improving the building. And with that, I would think about who needs to be your scaffolding, who needs to be on that team, legal, communications, sales, whoever needs to be on that team to be in the loop. When do they need to plug in? They don't need to be on every step of your journey. They might need to be on the concepts phase to really talk about what problem we're trying to solve and how we articulate that problem. They might want to be in, or you might want to have them in the final concepting stage to help you get out of your box that product developers can get into. We get really close to the things that we love and we develop to get a different perspective on it. And as you launch it, you're most certainly going to want those people involved, but really think about and tell them when you want them to plug in and why they're plugging in, what role you want them to serve. That, I find, enables the best, richest discussion and avoids people playing the role that they're not assigned or not credentialed to have. They don't have a background to have. So that's the system I like to set up in place with my clients. And then seek out your early adopters well before you get into the marketplace. Your food evangelists. Find these people and bring them into the fold. Show them who you are. Show them who you are as a person, as a company, and the journey you're on and what you're trying to solve. And the ones that didn't work and the ones that show promise, give them an inside look and allow them to be comfortable with what you're doing so they can be advocates for you externally when you do go live, through their own channels, whatever ways that they have to communicate, as well as sources for you when you need somebody to speak to a customer or a journalist or whatever it happens to be. I'll tell you, how are we doing on time? I've spent a lot of my career in the meat industry, and not that long ago, we took a busload of food evangelists to a feed yard here in Colorado, Five Rivers, one of the largest feed yards in the nation, 100,000 head at full capacity, and they're turning that 2 or 3 times a year, huge capacity. And the folks, we went into the office, we sat down, we heard from the feed yard manager, a brilliant man, telling us how they run the feed yard. We visited the mill where they mix the grains in the feed. We drove through the lots. We talked to the pen riders. We got to see how the feed was delivered, what they do at midnight when the cattle are sick. We got to see the little hospital where they move animals that are sick, and when they know that they're back, they're healthy, they move them back. We got to see all of this. On the bus ride back, everybody was pretty quiet and frankly a little smelly, because that is a smelly experience, but they were good sports. Our plan was to clean up, have dinner, and the next morning reflect on that, because one of the things that we wanted them to help us do is co-create, describe what you saw so that we could explain it to others. And a lady on the bus said, "So where's the factory farm?" And we said, "You've just experienced it. That is what people would consider a factory farm." She's like, "Well, that's not a factory." Of course not, it's not a factory. But it is how cattle spend the last few months of their lives before they go to slaughter. That's how this works. And she's like, you have removed basically the blind spot. I assumed the worst, and I am totally comfortable with that process. So bringing people in the fold, I guess the moral of the story is there, helps you tell your story better than you could tell your story through interviews and tours and samples and co-creation, all of that. So what I would say at the end is, develop bravely and inclusively, and I'd love to hear if you have questions.
Super, thanks, Kim. I'm going to actually take our first audience question. It's from David Green, and he says, "Kim, are early adopters typically the evangelists, or can it also be laggards as well?"
So I would say food evangelists can be laggards, if that's the kind of, they might not, because they personally are not intrigued by the product category. They can be a fast follower or a laggard in their purchase behaviors, so they're not necessarily the first ones who run out to get food. But I will say early adopters are often food evangelists. They're the people who are, there's an intersection of their personal interests and their willingness to try. And that's the sweet spot. That's the kind of person you want to find and bring in your fold.
Great. I'm going to invite the audience to go ahead over to the chat box and type in some questions, but I have a few questions for you, Kim, in the meantime. Talk to us about why transparency in the quality department is important for NPD.
Yeah. I think there, again, it's the blind spot issue. I think there's an assumption that somehow there's something being done that might not be right. And right is so subjective, but that's the problem. When you have no transparency, everybody puts their personal values and concerns into the equation. When you open the door and allow people to ask you questions, allow people to understand what you're doing, they feel part of it. And they have their confidence increases, their trust increases. And so that's, I think, why transparency is most important. I think many companies have learned this lesson the hard way. I've certainly been on many of those journeys with companies and industries where we assumed nobody wants to know about what we're doing behind this door. There's no reason to share this. It will bother people. It will overwhelm people. And then you get blindsided. And then they do ask, and they wonder why you haven't shared. And they wonder why you've let misinformation go. Is it true? So transparency diffuses a lot of those distrust issues.
What's your recommendation for working with natural or organic manufacturers that are opposed to using these scary ingredients that rely on agricultural technology?
Yeah. Finding common ground. I think we have a long way to go to not be as militant in our, if I'm natural organic, I cannot do any of this. But I have seen, and you've seen this too, people cross those lines and do it very effectively. I think Impossible has done it very effectively to explain, finally, I mean, it wasn't something they did immediately, but they did eventually talk about why they source a certain ingredient, their heme, from GMO seed and soybean. And I've heard livestock producers talk about the role of antibiotics in their operation, and yet they sell a natural product. And they talk about it as, I want to make sure these animals aren't suffering. And when they get sick, we treat them and we keep them out of the food supply until they're free of being sick and free of the antibiotics. I mean, it's all very transparent and logical when you actually talk about it. And so I would say common ground is what you need to find. If an organic or natural company has a committed a statement around less waste, less use of water, less whatever it happens to be that a ag technology can solve for, talking to them and bringing them into the fold on how it solves for it and how you can communicate with consumers. I think some of that fear stems from it's inconsistent with my brand and my consumers will walk out. So it's not really a true fear of the technology, more of the backlash that they anticipate experiencing. So I do think some companies, particularly B2B companies, often have to invest in that front work, that consumer research work, to say there's a way to talk about this that still supports your brand proposition. So that's how I think about it.
Do you have any other suggestions on how to go about introducing high-tech ingredients into the supply chain?
Other suggestions. So there's so many interesting ones. I do think the influencer channel is really important. So allowing those food evangelists and other influencers to sample and try and get to know you. I also think that limited time offers, so to speak, the classic LTO, whether that's through food service or through a online distributor, allowing people to try it and talk about it. So beyond just the food evangelist category, allowing folks to try this product, I think exposure gets people more comfortable. What else? I do think there's a need to engage thought leaders in your technology so that they're there giving you props for the work you're doing. And so that's different than a food evangelist who's just a consumer who's eager to share what she or he knows. It is, it's people with titles behind their name. They've been CEOs, they've been public health officials, they've been scientists at major universities in their career, and they know a little something about the field and have something to offer. And I think allowing them a platform, or just allowing them to know what you're doing and speak to it when the need arises, it's helpful. It all depends on, I think, the product and the technology and how you introduce it. There's also some very splashy ways to do that. So showing up in unexpected places, unexpected partnerships. I think, I laugh at the, Martha Stewart, Snoop Dogg type of partnership. It's like, when you can create those moments where people look at it and say, I would have never thought, and yet these two people are really excited about what they're talking about. It's a moment that gets eyeballs, that gets people to think about food and technology differently.
It's a great idea. We do have one audience question that came in, and we're running out of time, so this will probably be our last question.
Okay.
And I think you already actually touched on it, but Brian asks, how do you invite food evangelists as a manufacturer? I used to work for the U.S. soybean industry, so we did a lot of the same things that you did, Kim, talking about plant tours. We used to invite food bloggers to come in and learn about the benefits of soy. Talk to us about some other things that you've seen industries or manufacturers engage with external stakeholders.
Yeah, I am really excited about the role of analytics in this field in general, and identifying the folks who have the most relevance and persuasion power and reach. So I think there's a lot of pre-work that can be done that classically wasn't done. It was sort of a group of people who we thought were, influential, but not. We didn't have data underpinnings for that. So I'm really excited about that. I also think the connection to cause, to contribute, setting goals, and then developing partnerships to achieve those goals are very powerful. There's many companies who are doing amazing work with partners and NGOs to pilot actions, to commit to certain things, and then showing the journey of how they're getting there. Many of these are sustainability goals, set number of acres, or creating habitats for pollinators, or whatever it happens to be. And there's just 100 things that can be done. So I think those are compelling. I think pop culture and the intersection with pop culture is really exciting, particularly given how much we're kind of stuck in our devices. How do you use that as a moment? How do you find an intersection with, a John Legend, or a TV program, a very cool Netflix program that could feature and talk about the technology, I think is, and creating our own sort of entertainment, edutainment kind of stuff, I think is really cool field. So there's really a lot. Of course, social and intercepting people where they are and engaging in a conversation. Technology enables us to do that now in efficient ways that we couldn't before. These conversations were sort of swirling over here, and we were like, please let me speak, and you couldn't break in. Search engine optimization and marketing, super cool tactics. So there's a lot in digital that I think support the discussion about technology too.
I would imagine, Kim, that an organization like Ketchum, if a manufacturer is struggling or doesn't really know where to start, an organization like Ketchum could really be helpful to help them put together a team and an action plan.
Yeah, Dana, you're very kind to mention that. We would love to do that, and I would love to continue the conversation. So if you have any follow-ups or further questions, or you see in your organization some of the behaviors that we talked about and would love to redirect them and create a new moment for your work, your really important work, we'd love to help you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kim, for such a great presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did. I would like to invite everyone who's still hung on with us to go down and click on the survey link below. I know Kim and I would both be very interested in your feedback. And Kim's contact information is going to be on the last slide if you want to download the presentation, and you can get in touch and interact with us that way. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of TGCon.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, everybody.